They seemed very happy, very connected.
Chris had a crush on her in high school.
She was my stepmom. I considered her like my best friend.
When Chris and Heidi were in the process of moving, Chris started drinking again. It was pretty out of control.
His mind was gone.
She hit me across the head twice, man. It lit me up.
Because of the alcohol, he'd been acting strange.
I lost my father, but I also lost my stepmom.
The search took us to this concrete tomb. The concrete was probably a foot deep. You wouldn't have.
Paulding County is very small. Everybody knows everybody. Didn't have to worry about anything bad happening to you.
Heidi was very well known in the local area because of her family and their wedding or catering business, especially with small towns. I feel like everybody knew Heidi Grant, or the Grant family name at least.
Heidi took pride in planning weddings and making sure everybody's special day was just right for them. It was her family business, so it was more than a job to her.
Me and Heidi were good friends. We chatted a lot. We planned get-togethers. She was a very likable, funny person.
We liked to go shopping and listen to music together. She was also there for me, like friends. We were really close.
Her ex-husband and her have 2 children. She has a boy and a girl, but they did not live with her. They live with their dad.
Chris had a crush on her in high school. As they graduated, they both went their separate ways, and then they reconnected later on Facebook. Chris and Heidi, they were both divorced, and I think that they had a lot in common as far as that goes.
It was definitely a little weird seeing my dad with someone else, but I really grew to like her. It was a really good friendship, but also they were in love too. When my parents got divorced, I stayed with my mom for a week, and then I would go to my dad's and Heidi's for a week. Heidi and I, we did a lot together. She took me to school every day. We were really close, like friends. Heidi was a very big factor in my softball career too. She was at every single game.
Chris went to AA meetings 2-3 times a week, and Heidi was very supportive of him getting help and staying sober. It was definitely a struggle for Chris. He would get a handle on it, and then something happened, stress or even happiness, excitement, and it would trigger him.
Chris was very open with Heidi about his struggles with alcohol. I think that she thought she could really help him through it and keep him sober. Chris stopped over one day and he said that he was going to ask Heidi to marry him.
Chris seemed very excited. He couldn't wait to propose. Things were falling into place for Chris and Heidi and Olivia.
Chris and Heidi got married at Grant's Catering Hall. We were all supposed to be there, but COVID had hit and we weren't able to gather for that day.
It was just my dad, Heidi, me, and then Heidi's dad. I was glad to be able to witness it. They seemed very happy. It looked like it was going to be very bright in the future.
Shortly after Chris and Heidi got married, they decided to move back to Antwerp, which was closer to the catering business. They found a nice little house right in the center of town.
Chris took medications, help him with his drinking. He took a pill, which if he chose to drink, it would make him really sick. And the pill was very effective for Chris.
He was in a really good point in his life. He was really happy. He had stopped taking his medication because he felt happy. He felt like he could handle life, you know. That was the wrong thing. He should have kept taking them.
When Chris and Heidi found this house in Antwerp and they were in the process of moving, Chris started drinking again.
When my mom passed away in August of 2021, it affected us a lot. It affected Chris really bad.
We were all very worried that Chris was drinking again. Having to lose his mom in life was probably the worst thing he'd ever experienced as far as loss and pain. That's what set off, you know, the spiral, I believe, to his drinking again. When Chris would drink, you know, he'd start out as fun-loving and easygoing, and if he got really drunk, then it was argumentative. This time, when Chris started drinking, it was pretty out of control.
When I went to work one morning, Heidi showed up and she asked me if I could help them move. Basically, all they had left in Oakwood to move was the heavier stuff. She said Chris had been drinking. She didn't want him driving. And I told her, well, I can't really leave right now, but Dad and my older brother Dave are down at his house. I'm sure they would help you get the rest of your stuff out. So they went, hooked up my dad's trailer and took it over there. And just as they were leaving the house, Chris showed up. He was annoyed that my dad and my brother Dave was there to finish helping them move. They started arguing in the driveway, and Chris went to grab a hold of my brother Dave, and Dave grabbed a hold of him and took his legs out from underneath him and put him on the ground and said, I'm gonna let you up and we'll leave and that'll be that.
When we got home from work, we found out that an altercation had happened, an argument, and Chris was drinking. Heidi, she was always worried about what could happen if, say, the law was called, or, you know, she didn't want her business, her family's name dragged through the mud.
What's your emergency?
Get the out. Hello? Hey, man, my wife should try to kill me. Get the out. Hello? Hey, man, my wife should try to kill me.
On January 13th, 2022, a 911 call was made in reference to a domestic dispute that had occurred.
How'd she do that? Hit me with his foot. I was laying in my chair. She fucking hit me across the head twice, man. It lit me up.
What'd she hit you with?
Table leg.
The caller was Christopher Franklin, and he reported that he had been hit in the head by his wife. The dispatcher contacted me, and I decided I should go to the residence and just see what was going on. The dispatcher didn't report it to me as an active domestic violence incident, which means that it was going on. It was something that had already occurred. Half the party had already left. When I arrived at the property, Heidi Grant come to the door and stepped out onto the porch to talk to me. She was surprised that I was there, and I told her that Christopher had called and alleged that, she had hit him. And then she proceeded to tell me that he had been up all night drinking and he was now sleeping. She told me that there had been, no acts of violence between neither one of them in the house, and she just suspected that he was intoxicated when he made the call. When I asked her if we should go inside and talk to Chris, she said, George, I'd really rather you not. If we wake him up, he's probably just going to become agitated. Then I'll have hell to pay. We had dealt with Christopher on many occasions. We did know that he suffered from alcoholism, and I believed what she was telling me, that he was probably in there passed out. She said if there was any issues or anything, she would be sure and call. And at that point, I left the house.
When I came to the house, my dad wasn't there. Heidi told me that he was at work. I packed my bag real quick and then she took me to Indiana and I was gonna come home Sunday night. When Heidi picked me up from the tournament, we came home. My dad's truck wasn't there. We watched TV in the living room that night and she just kept saying, I wonder where your dad is, I wonder where your dad is. The next morning, Heidi told me that she found Dad's phone in the bedroom and she said that one of his friends tried to call him and that's how she found it.
When Chris would drink, he would get in his car and take off. And we were always concerned with driving, you know, and drinking and getting in an accident, not just hurting himself, but somebody else.
Heidi told me that she drove around looking for him. She said that she called local hospitals, local police stations, local bars. That Tuesday morning when I woke up, he still wasn't home, and that's when I really got concerned. Heidi took me looking for him, going around places that he would be. I asked Heidi if she called the police and to file a missing persons report, and she said that they couldn't do anything because he was an adult and that he could just leave on his own. That Thursday when I went back to my mom's house, I was more nervous that something bad happened to him. Something definitely didn't feel right. I was definitely really worried. My dad always wanted me to do my best. He always pushed me to do my best. He was a very big support in my softball. He would come practice with me. He would tell me what I was doing wrong and try to help me fix it. He was really funny and he always had to crack a joke or make someone laugh. I told my mom more details about it and said that I was really worried. She then texted my uncle Dave about it and said Dad has been missing for this many days.
Heidi talked about Chris was struggling with suicide. She talked about this song that he sent to everybody on his friends list, like on Facebook or Messenger, and it was a suicide song.
Heidi said that Chris's vehicle was out at the catering business with the door open, the keys, his wallet, everything was left in the vehicle with tracks leading down to the river.
Made it sound like maybe he killed himself and, you know, jumped in the river. Dave, my brother-in-law, walked the river and the coast over there for days looking for him because he thought that, you know, like maybe he had committed suicide over there.
Holding County Sheriff's Office.
Hello, my name is Dave Franklin.
My brother-in-law called Paulding County Sheriff's Department to report his brother Chris missing.
I'm from Dayton, Ohio. I need to make a silver alert. Apparently my brother has been gone since Sunday.
His workplace said that he hadn't been there that whole week. That's when Dave thought, you know, I need to call and file a missing persons report. We had to find out where he was at.
Okay, what's your brother's name?
Chris Franklin. His wife's name's Heidi Grant.
Okay. Why hasn't she called?
I couldn't tell you.
I coach high school wrestling when I'm not working at the police department. I was at a wrestling tournament, and that's when I received a call from my officer telling me that he had a missing persons case and that it was Christopher Franklin. I asked the officer, you know, who was making the report, and he told me that it was Christopher Franklin's brother, Dave Franklin, and that Heidi had not. He had gathered a little bit more information, and some things that he told me seemed a little off to me. The officer told me that Heidi had found Christopher Franklin's truck at the place of business where she worked, and then also that she had found Christopher's cell phone underneath the bed. That's when I decided to head back to Antwerp and speak with Heidi Grant.
Hi, are you Heidi? Come on back, Heidi. Come on back. He's back here on the phone. Just have a seat over there. Thank you for coming out. I greatly appreciate it.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
My suspicions were starting to rise that, there was just definitely more to the story than him just going off somewhere.
Tell me where he's at. That's all I need to know. Just tell me where he's at.
I have it, and this is such a nightmare.
Okay, what's your husband's name? Chris. C-H-R-I-S Franklin.
My wife, Captain Clemens, is always usually right there with me, assisting me. So when I interviewed Heidi, she was in the room with me.
How long have you been married?
Since November 27th, only 2 months.
2 months.
I did know Heidi before this happened. I used to babysit her children when they were little. When you live in a small community, you know everybody. Everybody is everybody's neighbor or relative in this town.
Okay, when did you last see him, talk to him?
It was Sunday. I left at about 10.
On the 16th.
So the last time that Heidi actually told us she had seen Chris would have been on that Sunday morning. She had gone to pick up Chris's daughter, Olivia, from a softball tournament.
I left, and before I left, I had asked him to come with me so I could make sure he stayed sober. And he's like, I don't feel like going there. And he's like, I'm gonna try to go over to Oakwood and get more stuff. And I looked at him and I said, if you pick that bottle back up, don't come back until you're sober. And that was the last thing I said to him.
Heidi said that when she returned with Olivia, his truck was gone.
So I went in, I checked the house, he wasn't there. So I just assumed he was in Oakwood getting stuff, because that's what he said he was gonna do.
The next morning when Heidi got up, she said she drove to the Oakwood home thinking he'd probably crashed there from drinking because she had told him not to come home if he was going to drink.
Heidi said she just drove around to different spots in an attempt to locate where Chris might be. And then at one point, Olivia even was with her.
We drove up and down. I don't remember what day it was, but we drove up and down.
Heidi indicated that a few days after Chris had been gone, she located his truck at the back of her business.
So what day did you find his truck at?
That was Tuesday. But I was shocked to see his truck sitting behind our warehouse, and I never even thought to look there. I just assumed he had his truck.
She said it was odd that she'd found the truck there. The door was a little bit ajar, keys on the ground. So she thought that was strange because he really loved his truck. Chris would have never left his truck.
Okay, now let's go to the 13th when I was there. 13th. What time did you come home in the morning?
There was a point in the interview where her demeanor totally changed.
Olivia PT.
She started to become somewhat emotional. She seemed more agitated than anything.
I don't remember.
She was really struggling to find the answers to the questions I was asking her.
What time did he get up, you say Saturday?
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
That's fine. So let's,
It gets me confused when I keep going back and forth in time.
I could tell that, there was something there. There was something more than what she was telling me.
I want you to listen to me. I want you to really listen to me really good here. Okay? It's really important for you.
Okay.
You and I both know that you know where he's at, and I need you to tell me that.
I wanted Heidi to tell me the truth so that we could, locate Christopher.
You and I both know that you took his truck out there.
I did earlier in the week when he was drinking to keep him from...
Listen, I'm telling you, I need to know what happened to him.
I don't know, George. I don't.
Yes, you do. Listen to me. I want to help you. Listen. Yes, you do. No, yes, you do. Yes, you do. Now listen to me.
I probably pleaded with Heidi additional 20 to 30 minutes, but she continued. She continued to stick with her story that she had no idea where he was.
I need to know where he's at. You and I both know you know where he's at, Heidi. I just need you to tell me. You and I both know.
I'm not a bad person.
You're not a bad person.
When Heidi made the statement, "I'm not a bad person," and became emotional, I felt that she knew more than what she was telling me.
Please, just tell me where he's at. His family's gonna want to know. Just tell
I know.
Tell me where he's at.
In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, she's done something to him.
Just tell me where he's at,
It's not
Heidi.
happening. This is such a nightmare.
I'm so sorry that you got to go through this. And I think he was probably somewhat mean to you. I think he yelled at you. I feel bad for you. I think it's horrible that women like you got to put up with things like that. But right now, Heidi, we got to start doing what's right for me, for you, for everybody, his family. We just need to know where he's at.
At one point, I think I threw out there, you know, if something has happened to him and you know where he is, we just need to find, you know, Chris. At that point, Heidi became emotional.
Heidi, you and I both know that you know where he is.
They will all hate me.
They won't hate you, Heidi.
I just really kind of pressed her and pleaded with her essentially to just tell me the truth.
Heidi, listen to me. We all make mistakes. Trust me. I made mistakes in my life. We've all made mistakes, Heidi. Things happen in life.
But then finally she started opening up. She reiterated to me that Christopher's mind was gone because of the alcohol. He'd been acting strange.
His mind was gone. He didn't know who I was, and he was trying. He was trying. I told you he was trying to see. He was swinging the bat at me. He was trying to hit me, and I kept dodging it. Oh God!
You're doing so good. You're doing good, Heidi. Just continue on, please. You're on such a.
Sorry.
It's okay, Heidi. I believe you.
When Heidi finally started telling what we believed to be the truth, she did seem a little more emotional, a little more upset. But still, I'm thinking, is he alive? Is he hurt?
He was trying. He was trying to kill me.
Okay.
He had totally flipped out on me for the TV.
Okay.
So I called my friend and I said, I need protection. And I was hoping when I went back that he would be okay.
I see. Just continue on. I know it's hard. Just
So I had a gun.
I understand.
Friend was just protection.
I understand.
Heidi told me that she had a friend that had firearms. You know, that morning she called the friend and asked him if, you know, she could still get that gun.
At that point, I kind of knew something was really wrong here.
They're not gonna hate you, Heidi. Heidi, they know what kind of person he was. Everybody girl's gonna hate me.
To find out the multitude of what she did, it was quite shocking to me as an officer.
We just need to know where he's at, Heidi. You and I both know that you know where he is. They're not gonna hate you, Heidi.
So in the morning of January 13th, Heidi tells us she entered her home and Chris was there, and she said he was kind of out of his mind.
He grabbed Libby's ball bat out of her bag and was like trying to swing it at me, so I just ran out the door.
When she left the home to go get the gun, Chris actually dialed 911 and said that his wife had beat him with a table leg.
Hello? She hit me across the head twice, man. Lit me up.
Heidi told me that she drove to a town nearby, retrieved the gun, and then returned back to Antwerp.
She alleges after she walked into the back door, her husband, Chris, gets up and he is completely out of his mind. He doesn't know who she is. He's flailing the bat. She's dodging him.
He just kept coming at me, and I knew he was going to bash my head in. And I was just...
She said she's scared to death for her life, and she reaches in her pocket, grabs the gun.
I didn't know the safety was on.
I see.
And I was just trying to scare him, and it went off, and I hit him, and he fell over.
Hearing that from Heidi, I was almost winded. I would have never thought in a million years that this would even happen in our community.
I didn't want him to suffer.
I understand. He was suffering, so you shot him again.
She said the final shot, she stood over him as he laid on the floor, and she shot him the final time.
How many times do you think you shot him?
No, I don't.
Okay.
If you shoot somebody one time and you're in true fear, and she alleged he went backwards and fell down, he's no longer a threat at that point. She could have picked up the phone and dialed 911 and got him the help that he needed. She didn't have to eliminate his life.
Heidi was telling me that all of this had occurred the same day that I had arrived at the house.
When I was there, had you already killed him? He was already dead. Is that why you were so hesitant to let me in? Obviously.
Well, because he was laying there dead, and I knew you would arrest me right on the spot, and I was flipping the out.
That contradicted what I saw that day on the porch. There was no emotion from her whatsoever to indicate to me that she had just killed someone. Essentially, Christopher was just laying on the other side of the door, deceased. After she'd confessed to shooting Chris, it was really important that I, find out where Christopher's body was.
I wrapped him up in plastic, and I took him. I had to muscle him down to the basement, and I buried him under cement.
I see.
She laid Chris out flat up against a interior wall, then took cinder blocks and leveled them up like too high, and then got the cement.
Was there already cement down in the basement, or where did you get the cement
I
at?
bought it.
Like in bags, or where did you buy the cement at?
I paid cash for it at Menards. I've done mortar work before, and it was the only thing the ground's frozen. I didn't know what to do. I was freaking out. I'm not a murderer.
I understand.
She said it took her 2 or 3 separate trips to acquire enough cement to entomb him in the basement. And then she also said that she'd hid the firearm at a location in the basement.
The area where this occurred at, did you clean that area, or how did that happen? Just tell me how did you buy the material?
Blood on the carpet, so I rented a rug doctor. I paid cash for it.
Based off of Heidi's actions and what she told me, led me to believe, she's pretty cold. At the conclusion of that interview, she was charged with murder and transported to the Paulding jail.
I was floored. I couldn't believe that she had killed him and put him in the basement. And for her to do that to Chris and put our family through that, that's really terrible. That's not something a human being does to somebody.
Heidi was adamant that she had killed Chris out of self-defense. She'd claimed due to his illnesses, he's out of his mind, and she never wavered from that.
She said she had to shoot Chris because she was afraid that he was going to kill her. Had a jury believed that Heidi had acted in self-defense, she would be found not guilty.
We just couldn't stop at Heidi telling us that she had shot Chris out of self-defense. We had to continue to investigate. We knew she had been lying to us previous in the interview, and to get those details were so important to find out exactly what did happen in that home.
We obtained a search warrant for Heidi's house, as it's now a crime scene. The forensic agents went in to gather evidence in the upstairs where the crime occurred. The search for Chris's body took us to this concrete tomb. We were able to, dismantle the top of it because there was a piece of wood laying across it. And then that's where we realized that, the concrete was probably approximately maybe a foot deep with his body encased in it. She really did her due diligence with securing him in that and covering it up. You wouldn't have known there was a body there. Down in the basement, underneath the stairwell, were some shelves with boxes. The gun was retrieved from one of them boxes.
Chief Clemens was able to get footage of Heidi as she made multiple visits to gather different things to clean up that scene.
You can leave everything there, but I will need you. Okay.
Heidi appeared to be very jovial. You would not have known that she had just killed her husband that day.
Have you guys got any good reviews on those? Oh, yeah. People swear by those. Good.
Probably the most shocking thing for me of that footage was when she's at the counter and she has the rug doctor. She looks at the clerk and asks the clerk if they get good reviews on that piece of equipment. Couldn't believe that, you know, her state of mind, she would ask that, knowing what she was about to do.
During the investigation, we had actually taken time to look at Heidi's Facebook, kind of see what's on there. We actually found that during the time that Chris would have been in the basement, she was selling items from her home. People were asked to come to her home to pick up those items.
These were definitely not the actions of a woman in distress. You know, she was just going about her daily life, just normal as could be. This case created a high volume of video footage, surveillance footage, that we obtained from all different sources, but the main one was a business right next door to Heidi's home. When we were looking through the footage, just days after the incident, there's a clip where this red truck is present. Footage was too grainy to show a clear plate number. You could tell by the footage, you know, he was a male, probably in his 40s or 50s, you know, wore glasses.
He is seen in the video helping Heidi, bringing out a freezer, loading that into his red truck.
He places that freezer in his red truck and then drives away with it.
So of course it's lots of questions in our mind. And so it was imperative to find out, who is this guy? What role does he play? Through our investigation, we were able to figure out who was in that red truck. His name was Neil Deemer.
I felt it was really important to speak with him and find out, you know, what he knew, if he knew anything at all. He said that him and Heidi had developed a friendship several years back, and that they had always just stayed in contact off and on.
Neil was at the home with Heidi. He thought it was an ex-husband, but he was supposed to be helping, and he was a drunk. He wasn't going to help. While at the home, he was helping her. Both things wrong, and one thing was a non-working freezer that she needed rid of because it was just in the way. So Neil actually loaded that into his truck, and he disposed that at his workplace. Neil adamantly denied any knowledge of Chris being murdered in that home.
During the interview, I asked him if him and Heidi had an intimate relationship, and he indicated that they did.
So Neil indicated that before they moved the furniture and disposed of the freezer, that he and Heidi had actually had sex on the living room floor. Listening to Neil tell us that they had had sex right above where Chris was laying, I was absolutely shocked. I'm thinking, what kind of woman are we really dealing with?
I didn't believe this was self-defense for several reasons. Normal person, I would think, would act rationally in a self-defense situation, and she'd have called the police. And the fact that I was there that morning and he was dead on the other side of the door, that would have been her opportunity to tell me, you know, that that's what occurred.
So we continued to investigate to make sure that we could prove this was an absolute murder and not a self-defense case like she was alleging.
It was important that, you know, if that did happen, that I find the evidence to prove that Heidi lied. During our search, we were informed that there was a possible witness that was an employee of the Pit Stop gas station that may have seen Chris the morning of the incident. The Pit Stop is probably less than a block away from where Chris's house is. When I spoke with the employee, she indicated that Chris had come in and purchased cigarettes. She said that his shirt was bloody. He had a knot or a black eye, and his face had blood on it. She had asked him if he needed help, and he told her that he was okay and that he'd already called the police.
Hello? Hey, man, my wife should try to kill me.
Based on the 911 records, we was able to determine that Chris must have went to the gas station minutes after making the 911 call. This eyewitness account was very crucial in determining the fact that he had been assaulted by Heidi, and without that witness, we wouldn't know whether or not that truly did happen.
So talking to the gas station attendant really turned things around for us. We knew Heidi wasn't the victim she was alleging she was.
Heidi never wavered from that this was self-defense. But I believe the evidence shows that Heidi Grant contemplated murdering her husband. I think she was tired of the alcoholism. I think she was worried about her reputation in our community. I think when she arrived home in the morning, she struck him with either a ball bat or a table leg. He makes the 911 call.
Hey, man, my wife should try to kill me.
She then left to get the gun. He obviously left and went to the gas station, purchased some items, returned back home. She returns and then shoots him. She shot him 10 times.
That just screams volumes to me of the hate and the rage she must have had for her husband.
She made mention that it was really difficult for her to get him down to the basement all by herself. She has to drag him over to there. When she got him to the top of the stairs, she just shoved him like a sled. She gets him to the bottom of the stairs, and then she has to drag him up where she was going to bury him, and then encased him in a tomb in the basement. As far as the motive, my speculation is she just felt that being in this small community, living with an alcoholic, she didn't want that type of image, and she basically removed Chris from her life, and it wouldn't hurt her family's business.
It's absolutely heartbreaking that the life of a human wasn't as important as her reputation in our small village.
Conclusion of collecting all of the evidence, Heidi was charged and indicted by a county grand jury with aggravated murder. Heidi pled not guilty and was sticking to the story of self-defense. Heidi took the stand during the trial, which is very uncommon for a defendant. She was pleading her case of self-defense to the jury.
There's a lot riding on her testimony. If they truly believed in their mind that she was a victim of this domestic situation, she could walk away. And then there would be no justice for Chris and his loved ones.
I was very confident in the fact that we would get a conviction, but you never know what a jury may or may not believe.
Once the jury came back with a decision, of course you heard weeping from the family that loved Chris, gasps from the family that loved her, and she sat motionless and said nothing.
Heidi Grant's sentence was 15 to life for murder. She got a mandatory 1 year for the use of the firearm.
Heidi was also sentenced to additional 30 months for tampering with evidence, and that all has to be served consecutively. So she will be in jail for a very long time.
When I heard that she'd been found guilty of murder, I was happy about it, but in the same time, sad. It just ruined a lot of lives. I'm glad she didn't get away with it.
It's been about 2 years, and I still look at how my life could have been if none of this would have happened. When Heidi murdered my dad,
No one in that town remembers the exact moment when fear arrived. It didn't come with sirens or screaming headlines. It slipped in quietly, like dust through a cracked window, settling into corners people stopped looking at. Years later, they would swear they felt it that night, even if they couldn't name it then. A warm Texas evening, cicadas loud enough to drown out thought, a house with its porch light still on long after midnight, and a woman who never made it home. In 2003, the town of Merrow Creek, Texas, was the kind of place people described with a shrug. One main road, a diner that closed at 8, high school football on Fridays. Everyone knew everyone, or at least pretended they did. Crime happened elsewhere. Violence belonged to big cities. Not here. That belief shattered the moment Emily Carter vanished without a trace. Emily was 27, a local elementary school teacher, not the kind of person who disappeared. She had routines, predictable habits. She called her mother every Sunday night. She parked in the same spot at the grocery store. She locked her doors. On the evening of September 14th, she left a friend's house just before 10, waved goodbye, and drove into the dark. Her car was found the next morning on the shoulder of County Road 6, engine cold, driver's door slightly open, keys still in the ignition. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No note. Just absence. The first headlines were cautious. Local woman reported missing. By day 3, the language hardened. Mysterious disappearance shocks quiet Texas town. By week 2, the words everyone dreaded appeared in print for the first time. Cold case looming. Investigators walked the road, where the car was found again and again. Flashlights cut through tall grass. Dogs' trace scents that went nowhere. Tire tracks overlapped until they meant nothing. The car itself became a crime scene frozen in time. A half-empty coffee cup in the holder. A stack of graded papers on the passenger seat. Her purse untouched. Whoever took Emily Carter didn't want her money. They wanted her. Rumors filled the silence where facts refused to form. A stranger passing through. A secret boyfriend. A student's angry parent. A truck seen idling near the road. None of it solid. All of it poisonous. Neighbors eyed neighbors differently. Doors locked earlier. Children stopped riding bikes after sunset. The town learned a new sound. The low, constant hum of unease. Police pressure mounted fast, then faded just as quickly. Leads dried up. Witness statements contradicted each other. Surveillance cameras didn't exist on that stretch of road. Cell phone pings were vague, unreliable. A technological promise still years away from delivering certainty. After 6 months, the investigation slowed. After a year, the file thickened but went nowhere. After 3, the word cold stopped being a warning and became a verdict. Emily's family refused to let the story die. Her mother kept the porch light on every night, long after logic said it didn't matter. Her father drove County Road 6 at random hours, staring into fields as if the land might finally confess. They gave interviews on anniversaries. They taped flyers to gas pumps even when people pretended not to see them. Hope became something brittle, but they carried it anyway. As the years passed, Merrow Creek changed around the absence. New families moved in, unaware of the weight carried by older residents. The diner got a new sign. The school added a wing. Emily's classroom was repainted. Her name faded from conversation, then resurfaced only in whispers. Remember that girl? They never found her. Cold case. Behind closed doors, detectives revisited the file whenever something, anything, reminded them it was unfinished. A similar disappearance in another county. A confession from a dying inmate that led nowhere. A tip that sounded promising until it collapsed under scrutiny. Each time, the same outcome. No body. No weapon. No arrest. Just the echo of a life interrupted. Then, in late 2022, nearly 2 decades after Emily vanished, something changed. Not dramatically. Not at first. A routine evidence audit. A box pulled from storage. Its label yellowed. Corners soft with age. Inside, Items no one expected to matter anymore. Fibers. Soil samples. A degraded DNA swab taken from the steering wheel of Emily's car. Collected back when technology couldn't ask the right questions. Now it could. What followed happened quietly, deliberately, far from cameras. Lab technicians reran tests. Databases were queried again, broader this time, deeper. Names surfaced, then fell away. Until one didn't. A partial match. Inconclusive, but close enough to demand attention. Close enough to reopen wounds the town thought had scarred over. The name tied to that DNA wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a drifter. It belonged to someone who had lived in Marrow Creek in 2003. Someone who had attended the same football games. Shopped at the same grocery store. Someone who had been interviewed once, briefly, and cleared because there was nothing solid to hold on to. Back then, he was just another face in a town full of them. When word of a possible arrest began to circulate, it moved faster than the truth ever had. Whispers turned into shock. Shock into disbelief. After all this time, here, him, the headline that would later circle the country formed before anyone printed it. Texas 2003 cold case solved. Surprise arrest rocks small town. But even as handcuffs clicked shut and cameras finally arrived, one thing remained unchanged. Emily Carter was still missing. No grave, no final answers. Just a town holding its breath. Unsure whether justice had finally arrived or whether it was about to learn that some mysteries don't end, no matter how badly we want them to. No one in that town can agree on when the fear truly began. Some say it was the morning her car was found, sitting wrong on the side of County Road 6, angled as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. Others insist it started earlier, the night before, the moment Emily Carter failed to answer her phone. The moment silence replaced routine. What everyone agrees on is this: once it arrived, it never really left. Marrow Creek, Texas, was never meant to carry a story like this. It was a town that lived on predictability. Sunrise over flat land. Evenings measured by porch lights flicking on in sequence. Crime belonged to television screens, not front yards. In 2003, people still believed that knowing your neighbors was the same thing as being safe. Emily Carter believed it too. She was 27 years old, an elementary school teacher, the kind of person parents trusted without question. She smiled easily, spoke softly, and never missed a day of work unless she was sick. She didn't drink much. She didn't disappear. On September 14th, she left a friend's house just before 10 p.m., said she'd call when she got home, and drove off into a warm Texas night that felt no different from 100 others. She never called. By morning, her absence had a shape. Her car sat half a mile from where it should have turned toward town. Engine off, door ajar. Keys still in the ignition like punctuation at the end of an unfinished sentence. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed. No shattered glass. No blood. No chaos. Just the quiet suggestion that someone had exited in a hurry or been removed with care. The first officers on scene didn't know what they were looking at yet. An accident, maybe. A breakdown. But as minutes turned into hours and hours into questions, the word missing began to harden into something heavier. Search dogs arrived. Flashlights swept fields that seemed endless in daylight, but claustrophobic in the dark. The dogs lost the scent near a drainage ditch and never found it again. By day 3, the town was watching itself. By week 1, it was watching everyone else. Local headlines shifted tone with each passing edition. Teacher fails to return home. Then mysterious disappearance stuns Marrow Creek. Then the phrase no family ever wants to see in print, especially not this early. Case risks going cold. Investigators dug into Emily's life with the blunt force of necessity. Her phone records, her emails, her routines. They found nothing that explained why someone would want her gone. No enemies, no secret life, no warning signs. That absence of motive only made the situation worse. It suggested randomness. And randomness terrifies small towns more than evil ever could. Rumors filled the vacuum where answers refused to exist. A pickup truck seen idling near County Road 6. A man at the gas station who stared too long. A scream someone thought they heard, but couldn't place in time. Each story grew sharper as it was repeated, cutting trust into pieces. People locked doors they'd never locked before. Parents walked their children to school. The town learned how fragile normal really was. Police followed every lead until there were no leads left to follow. Interviews piled up, names circled and crossed out, theories built and dismantled. Without a body, the investigation moved in shadows. Without witnesses, it stalled. Months passed, then a year. The search scaled back, then stopped altogether. Emily Carter didn't come home, and Marrow Creek was forced to learn how to live around that fact. Her family never accepted it. Emily's mother left the porch light on every night, a ritual that outlasted logic. Her father drove the same stretch of road again and again, staring into fields as if the land might finally surrender the truth. They spoke her name in interviews long after reporters stopped calling. They aged in public, their grief documented, while the case quietly slid into a filing cabinet labeled unsolved. By 2006, the investigation was officially cold. The word felt cruel, clinical, and final. Cold case. It suggested time had done what violence could not, erase urgency. But in Marrow Creek, cold didn't mean forgotten. It meant unresolved. It meant everyone carried a version of the story in their head. A version where the ending never arrived. Years passed. The diner changed owners. New families moved in. Unaware of why certain streets went quiet after dark, Emily's classroom was repainted. Another teacher stood where she once had, writing a different name on the board. Only the older residents remembered how quickly safety had vanished, how suddenly the town had learned that familiarity could be an illusion. Behind the scenes, the case never fully slept. Detectives revisited it whenever something brushed too close. A similar disappearance in another county. A jailhouse confession that unraveled under scrutiny. A tip that promised everything and delivered nothing. Each time, the same result. No closure. No answers. Just the steady accumulation of years. Then, almost 20 years later, something changed. Not because of a witness. Not because of a confession. Because of evidence that had been waiting patiently for science to catch up. In late 2022, during a routine review of archive cases, a technician opened a box that hadn't been touched in years. Inside were fragments once deemed insignificant. Fibers collected from Emily's car, soil samples from her tires, a degraded DNA swab taken from the steering wheel, logged and shelved back when the technology couldn't ask precise questions. Now it could. The sample was run again, then again. Databases expanded. Algorithms compare patterns no human ever could. For weeks, nothing happened. Then a notification appeared on a screen. Quiet and devastating. A partial match. Not enough to declare certainty. Enough to demand attention. The name attached to that match didn't belong to a stranger passing through town. It wasn't a drifter or a ghost. It belonged to someone who had lived in Marrow Creek in 2003. Someone who had been questioned briefly and dismissed when nothing concrete surfaced. Someone who had attended football games, eaten at the diner, waved at neighbors. Someone who had blended in so well that no one remembered noticing him at all. When investigators returned, they did so carefully, quietly. Surveillance before confrontation, paperwork before headlines. They knew what an arrest would do to this town. They also knew what reopening the wound would do to Emily's family. News leaked anyway. It always does. Whispers turned into shock. Shock into disbelief. After all this time, here, that guy, the phrase that would soon dominate screens and newspapers formed before anyone officially confirmed it. Texas 2003 cold case solved. Surprise arrest rocks small town. Cameras arrived. Flashing lights reflected off familiar buildings. A man was let out in handcuffs, while neighbors watched through blinds that no longer felt protective. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the case had movement, momentum, the illusion of resolution. But one truth refused to change. Emily Carter was still missing. No remains, no final moment, no certainty about what truly happened on that stretch of road. Just an arrest, a headline, and a town holding its breath, unsure whether justice had finally arrived or whether the past was about to prove that some mysteries don't end, no matter how loudly we demand that they do. The arrest didn't bring relief the way people expected. It brought noise. Sirens where there had been silence. Cameras where there had been memory. And questions that felt sharper than the ones left behind 20 years earlier. In Marrow Creek, justice didn't arrive like closure. It arrived like a second shockwave. The man in handcuffs was named Daniel Reeves. 49 years old. Divorced. Employed off and on as a mechanic. In 2003, he'd lived less than 3 miles from where Emily Carter's car was found. Back then, he'd been just another local face, interviewed once because his name surfaced in a neighborhood canvas, cleared because there was nothing tangible to hold him. No record, no motive, no reason to dig deeper. Time had buried him efficiently. Now, time had dragged him back. As the patrol car pulled away, the town fractured into camps almost instantly. Some people nodded, saying it made sense, replaying old conversations with new suspicion. Others refused to believe it outright. Not him. He fixed my truck. He coached my kids' little league team. Familiarity, once again, masqueraded as safety. Detectives didn't talk. They rarely do at this stage. But fragments slipped through official silence, carried by neighbors, overheard in diners, leaked in ways no department ever admits to. The DNA match wasn't perfect. Partial. Enough to reopen the case. Not enough to end it. That distinction mattered more than the headlines let on. Because without a body, without a confession, without a clear reconstruction of what happened on County Road 6, everything was still fragile. Investigators returned to the beginning, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Emily Carter's last known movements were mapped again, minute by minute, detail by detail. Her phone pinged a tower near the edge of town at 9:47 p.m. Her car was last seen passing a gas station camera at 9:52, headlights steady, no sign of distress. After that, nothing. A dead zone. A stretch of road with no witnesses, no coverage, no mercy. Daniel Reeves's phone records from that night were thin, incomplete, the kind of technological gap that feels unforgivable in hindsight. He claimed he'd been home alone, watching television, asleep by 10. No one could confirm it. No one ever had. In 2003, that lack of contradiction had been enough to move on. In 2023, it wasn't. Old interview tapes were pulled from storage, digitized, played back with fresh ears. Reeves's voice was calm, cooperative, almost forgettable. He answered questions without resistance, without emotion. He didn't ask many questions himself. That detail stood out now. People with nothing to hide usually want to know why they're being questioned. Reeves hadn't. Witnesses from the original investigation were contacted again, older now. Their memories blurred by time and hindsight. Some admitted they hadn't told police everything back then. Not lies. Omissions. A truck parked where it shouldn't have been. A man walking along County Road 6 late that night. Details that felt insignificant at the time, now heavy with implication. The defense called it memory contamination. Prosecutors called it clarity. As the case moved forward, Marrow Creek found itself trapped between two timelines. The past, where Emily Carter vanished without explanation, and the present, where everyone was expected to believe the mystery had been solved, despite the absence that still defined it. Emily's family watched from the center of the storm. Her parents, older now, careful with their hope. They'd lived through false dawns before. Tips that promised answers. Suspects that collapsed under scrutiny. They didn't celebrate the arrest. They waited. Waiting had become muscle memory. Then came the first crack. During a follow-up search of Reeves's former property, land he'd sold years earlier, investigators found something they hadn't expected to find at all. Not remains, not clothing, but disturbed soil near the tree line, inconsistent with natural erosion, flagged by ground-penetrating radar, the kind of anomaly that doesn't prove anything, the kind that refuses to be ignored. Excavation teams arrived under cover of night, floodlights turning familiar land into something alien. Neighbors gathered anyway, watching from a distance, their presence a silent admission that this case belonged to everyone now. Shovels cut into earth that had held its secrets for 2 decades. Hours passed, then days. Nothing definitive was recovered. No bones, no jewelry, no physical confirmation of Emily Carter's fate. The search ended quietly, almost apologetically. Another expectation unmet. Another wound reopened without being healed. Critics pounced. Rushed arrest. Weak evidence. Cold case desperation. And still, prosecutors pressed forward. They leaned into behavioral patterns. Reeves's proximity. His inconsistent statements when re-interviewed. The DNA match, partial but persistent. Fibers found in Emily's car that matched materials from Reeves's old workshop. Common enough to explain away, rare enough to raise eyebrows. Alone, each piece meant little. Together, they formed a narrative prosecutors believed a jury could follow. The town followed it too, whether it wanted to or not. At the diner, conversations dropped when certain people walked in. Old friendships strained under new suspicion. Parents wondered what they'd missed, what they'd ignored, who they'd trusted too easily. The case wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about the possibility that evil hadn't come from outside. It had been here all along, wearing a familiar face. Reeves maintained his innocence. Through attorneys, through statements, through silence. He denied knowing Emily beyond casual recognition. Denied being on County Road 6 that night. Denied everything except the one fact no one could explain away. His DNA had been found in her car. He claimed contamination, secondary transfer, coincidence. Defense experts backed him, pointing out how easily fibers and trace DNA can travel, especially in a small town where people share spaces without realizing it. The science that reopened the case now complicated it. As trial preparations began, one truth became impossible to ignore. The case everyone wanted solved was still missing its center. Emily Carter herself. Without her, every theory felt incomplete, every conclusion provisional. And beneath the legal arguments, beneath the forensic debates, a darker question lingered, unspoken but omnipresent. If Daniel Reeves didn't kill Emily Carter, then where had she gone? And why had her disappearance waited 20 years to start speaking again? Once the case reached this point, it stopped being just about evidence and started becoming about memory. Not what people remembered, but what they had trained themselves to forget. Because when investigators looked closer at 2003, they didn't just find missing answers. They found missing urgency. In the weeks after Emily Carter vanished, Marrow Creek had done what small towns always do when fear threatens to tear the illusion apart. It tightened inward. It searched just enough to say it tried. Then it moved on. Files were closed with language that sounded responsible but meant surrender. Leads were deprioritized. Manpower reassigned. No one said the words out loud, but the message was clear. Without a body, without blood, without a confession, the town wasn't ready to believe the worst. That decision echoed for 20 years. As prosecutors rebuilt the timeline, they uncovered how narrow the original investigation had been. Daniel Reeves hadn't been followed after his initial interview. His movements weren't tracked beyond his own statement. His alibi wasn't verified because no one pressed hard enough to verify it. In 2003, he hadn't looked like a monster. He'd looked like everyone else. New investigators saw that as the first failure. They started with geography. County Road 6 wasn't random. It was a connector road, lightly traveled at night, familiar to locals, invisible to outsiders. Reeves had driven it countless times. He knew where headlights disappeared. He knew where cars slowed instinctively. He knew where no one would hear a scream, even if one existed. Then they looked at opportunity. Reeves had left work early that day. No one could say why. No one had asked. His truck, sold years later, had never been searched. Another oversight. Another door quietly closed. As these details surfaced, so did resistance. Former officers bristled at the implication that something had been missed, that the case hadn't gone cold because it was impossible, but because it had been allowed to. Tension built between generations of law enforcement, the past defending itself against the present's accusations. Meanwhile, the defense began dismantling the narrative piece by piece. They argued that County Road 6 was too obvious, that any local could have known it, that proximity didn't equal guilt, that Reeves had been cooperative from the start, that the DNA was partial, degraded, impossible to date. It could have arrived in Emily's car days earlier, weeks earlier, through contact no one remembered because it had meant nothing at the time. And then the defense introduced a name the town hadn't heard in years. Marcus Hale. In 2003, Hale had been transient, drifting between construction jobs, living out of his truck. He'd been questioned briefly after Emily vanished because someone claimed to have seen him near the gas station that night. His alibi was weak. His history was messy. He had left town 2 weeks later without explanation. Investigators had flagged him, then lost him, then forgotten him. The defense didn't forget. They tracked Hale down living 3 states away, older, sick, and barely recognizable from the grainy photos in the original file. He denied involvement, of course. Everyone did. But when pressed about the night Emily disappeared, his answers didn't align with the old reports. Times shifted, details changed, and then came the detail no one expected. Hale claimed he'd seen a woman arguing with a man on County Road 6 that night, a man near a parked vehicle, a man he couldn't identify, a man who wasn't him. The prosecution dismissed it as desperation. The defense called it reasonable doubt. The town called it confusion, because suddenly, the neat story everyone wanted to believe began to fracture. Investigators dug deeper into Hale's past, hoping to close that door for good. They found violence, theft, assault, enough to make him dangerous, not enough to place him at the scene with certainty. The window for answers narrowed again. Then came another revelation, one that shifted the tone entirely. A former dispatcher came forward, quietly at first, then officially. In 2003, on the night Emily vanished, a call had come in just after 10 p.m. A woman's voice, breathing hard, disoriented. The call dropped before she could say where she was. At the time, it had been logged as accidental. Pocket dial. No follow-up. The dispatcher had remembered it for years. The number had belonged to Emily Carter. That detail detonated across the case. If true, Emily had been alive after leaving her friend's house. Alive and in distress. Alive long enough to try to call for help. The prosecution seized on it. The defense questioned the memory. Records were incomplete. Logs missing. Technology unreliable. But the damage was done. The case was no longer just about what happened on County Road 6. It was about what might have been interrupted, about how close help may have been, about how one dropped call could haunt an entire town. As trial dates approached, Marrow Creek felt the weight of its own history pressing inward. People revisited their own memories, searching for moments they dismissed too quickly, sounds they'd ignored, feelings they'd buried. The past stopped feeling distant and started feeling personal. Reeves sat in jail, watched by guards who avoided eye contact, unsure whether they were looking at a monster or a man swallowed by circumstance. He refused a plea deal, refused to explain himself further. His silence became its own accusation. Emily's parents visited County Road 6 for the first time in years. They stood where her car had been found and said nothing. The road looked smaller than they remembered, less dramatic, more cruel. It didn't look like the place where a life should have ended. That was the worst part. The prosecution prepared to argue inevitability, that Reeves had crossed paths with Emily by chance. That opportunity had become impulse. That impulse had become disappearance. They planned to tell a jury that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it blends in. Sometimes it waits. The defense prepared to argue doubt, that the case was built on assumptions sharpened by time, that desperation had filled gaps science still couldn't close, that someone else had walked away, while the town focused on a familiar face because familiarity felt easier to confront. And above it all hovered the truth no one could escape. Emily Carter had vanished into a system that wasn't ready to see what it was looking at. Whether Daniel Reeves was responsible or not, the case had already revealed something unforgivable. The town had failed to protect one of its own. Then it had failed to search hard enough for the truth. As jury selection loomed, one question began to dominate every conversation, every headline, every sleepless night. What if the real mystery wasn't who took Emily Carter, but how so many chances to find her had been quietly, fatally missed? By the time the trial drew close, the town no longer felt like a backdrop. It felt like a witness. Every street, every storefront, every stretch of road seemed to lean in, heavy with memory, as if Marrow Creek itself were trying to remember what it had once chosen to forget. The case had stopped being about one night in 2003 and started becoming about everything that followed. The silences, the shortcuts, the comfort of believing nothing terrible could happen here. The prosecution understood that before they ever stepped into a courtroom, they knew jurors wouldn't just be weighing evidence. They would be weighing familiarity, trust, the uncomfortable realization that evil doesn't always arrive from outside town limits. Sometimes it already has an address. They built their case slowly, deliberately, threading together moments that had never been connected before. Daniel Reeves's proximity to Emily Carter wasn't presented as coincidence, but as inevitability. Two lives moving through the same small geography. Two routines overlapping without meaning, until one night meaning was forced into existence. County Road 6 wasn't framed as a random location. It was framed as a choice, a place someone local would know how to use. The steering wheel DNA was introduced not as a miracle but as persistence, evidence that had waited 20 years for science to catch up. Partial, yes, but real. And when paired with the fibers recovered from the car, fibers consistent with materials Reeves had worked with daily in his old mechanic shop, the narrative sharpened. Not proof, pressure. Witnesses took the stand and aged visibly under the lights. Old neighbors, former co-workers, people who hadn't thought about Emily Carter in years until the case ripped her name back into the present. Some spoke confidently, others hesitated, their memories fractured by time and guilt. One woman admitted she'd seen Reeves's truck near County Road 6 late that night, but hadn't mentioned it in 2003 because she didn't want trouble. Her voice cracked as she said it. Trouble, she realized now, had come anyway. The defense attacked relentlessly. They called experts who spoke in calm, technical tones, explaining how trace DNA could move invisibly through shared spaces, through tools, through borrowed equipment. They emphasized the absence of a body, the absence of a crime scene soaked in violence. They reminded the jury that suspicion grows easily in hindsight, that memory is not evidence, that science can reopen a case without being able to close it. Then they leaned into the failures. They laid out the gaps in the original investigation like an indictment of its own. Missed searches, unverified alibis, lost records, the dropped 911 call that may or may not have been followed properly. They argued that the case hadn't gone cold because the truth was hidden too well, but because it hadn't been pursued hard enough. And now, they said, desperation was being dressed up as resolution. Marcus Hale's name resurfaced again, heavier this time. The defense framed him not as a scapegoat, but as an unanswered question the prosecution had never fully confronted. A man with a violent past, a man near the scene, a man who left town abruptly. They didn't claim he killed Emily Carter. They claimed only that the state could not prove he didn't. The courtroom shifted with each argument, the balance of belief tilting back and forth like something unstable. Jurors took notes. Faces tightened. No one looked comfortable. That, in itself, felt appropriate. Outside, Marrow Creek struggled to coexist with the spectacle unfolding in its name. News vans lined streets that had never seen them before. National headlines reduced decades of pain to a single sentence, repeating the phrase that still felt premature. Cold case solved. For many residents, it felt like a lie spoken too loudly to challenge. Emily's parents attended every session, sitting close, hands folded, eyes fixed forward. They didn't react to testimony. They didn't cry when photos appeared on screens. They had learned long ago that hope was dangerous in public. Still, when the dropped call was mentioned again, when the idea that Emily had reached for help surfaced once more, her mother closed her eyes. Just for a second, long enough to imagine what might have happened if someone had answered differently. As closing arguments approached, the tone shifted again. Less forensic, more human. Prosecutors spoke of trust, how Emily had trusted her town, her routines, the idea that she was safe. They spoke of accountability, not just for one man, but for a system that had waited too long to ask hard questions. They asked jurors to consider not just what could be proven absolutely, but what could be understood reasonably. The defense responded with restraint. They warned against emotional resolution, masquerading as justice. They reminded the jury that unsolved cases create pressure to solve them, even when the answers remain out of reach. They spoke the word doubt until it felt heavy enough to sit between every piece of evidence. When the jury was sent to deliberate, Marrow Creek held its breath again. A habit had perfected over 20 years. Conversations stopped. Businesses closed early. People checked phones obsessively, refreshing headlines that offered nothing new. The town waited not just for a verdict, but for permission to feel something final. Hours passed, then a day, then another. Speculation filled the silence. Some believed conviction was inevitable. Others feared acquittal would fracture the town permanently, leaving everyone to choose sides with no truth to anchor them. Emily Carter's absence hovered over it all, a reminder that no verdict could bring her back. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom rose as one. The foreperson's voice trembled slightly as the verdict was read. Guilty on some counts, not guilty on others. A legal compromise that satisfied no one completely and devastated everyone equally. Daniel Reeves was led away again, this time not as a suspect but not quite as a confirmed answer either. Sentencing would come later. Appeals would follow. The case, it seemed, still refused to end cleanly. Outside, cameras captured reactions that said more than words ever could. Relief tangled with anger. Closure collided with doubt. The headline had promised resolution. Reality delivered something messy, eh? And beneath it all, one question refused to loosen its grip. If justice had finally been served, why did the truth still feel unfinished? The verdict didn't settle into Marrow Creek. It hovered above it, uneasy, unresolved, like a storm that refused to either break or pass. People tried to resume their routines, but the town had crossed a line it couldn't step back over. Justice had spoken, yet certainty hadn't followed. The gap between those two things became impossible to ignore. Daniel Reeves sat in a county cell awaiting sentencing, his name now etched permanently into the story, whether he belonged there or not. Half the town spoke of him in the past tense, as if the mystery had ended the moment the jury stood. The other half spoke his name carefully, quietly, as if saying it too loudly might expose how fragile the verdict really was. Emily Carter's parents returned home after the trial to a house that felt smaller than it once had. The porch light still came on at dusk, Not out of hope anymore, but habit. Habit was easier to carry. Interviews came again. Cameras asking the same questions they'd asked 20 years earlier, only now framed differently. Do you feel closure? Her mother paused every time. Closure, she had learned, was a word people used when they didn't know what else to offer. The appeals process began almost immediately. Defense attorneys filed motions questioning the DNA interpretation, the admissibility of witness memories altered by time, the weight given to circumstantial patterns presented as narrative. Prosecutors responded with confidence, but behind closed doors they acknowledged what everyone felt. The case rested on a thin spine of evidence, strong enough to stand, weak enough to bend. As legal arguments churned, something else happened quietly, almost invisibly. People started talking again. Not the loud, performative conversations of the trial, but the late-night ones. The kind whispered over kitchen tables. The kind carried by guilt. A former volunteer searcher admitted to a friend that he'd skipped a sector back in 2003 because it was already dark and he was tired. Another man confessed that he'd found a torn piece of fabric near a ditch weeks after Emily vanished and thrown it away, assuming it was trash. No malice, just ordinary decisions that, stacked together, began to feel unbearable. Investigators took these statements seriously, reopening micro-searches of the past, mapping what had been looked at and what hadn't. The realization was brutal. There were gaps big enough for a body to disappear into and never be found again. Not because someone was clever, because everyone was human. The media shifted tone. National outlets that had declared the cold case solved now hedged their language. Questions remain. Mystery persists. The headline that had once promised certainty began to sound premature, even irresponsible. Marrow Creek was no longer just the site of a crime. It was a case study in how time complicates truth. Then came the call. A man from a neighboring county contacted authorities late one night. His voice strained, his story hesitant. In 2004, he said, he'd given a ride to a woman matching Emily Carter's description near a rest stop 40 miles away. She'd been disoriented, afraid. She'd asked to be taken anywhere but back to town. He hadn't come forward because he hadn't known she was missing. By the time he did, years later, he assumed it was too late. Investigators tracked every detail. Gas receipts, traffic patterns, weather reports. Nothing confirmed the story. Nothing disproved it either. The possibility cracked something open that no verdict could contain. If Emily Carter had survived the initial encounter, if she had escaped, then the entire narrative collapsed inward on itself. The prosecution dismissed the lead publicly, unwilling to destabilize a conviction still under scrutiny. Privately, they acknowledged the danger. The defense seized on it immediately, folding it into appeal filings as evidence that the state had rushed toward an answer instead of the truth. Marrow Creek absorbed the rumor the way it absorbed everything else. Slowly, unevenly, painfully. Some clung to it like oxygen. Others rejected it outright, unwilling to reopen wounds they had just begun to bandage. The town split again, not along legal lines, but emotional ones. Emily's parents heard the story last. They didn't ask for details. They didn't ask for hope. They had learned what hope cost. Still, that night, the porch lights stayed on longer than usual. Years had passed since Emily Carter vanished, but time had failed to do its one supposed job. It hadn't softened the mystery. It hadn't buried the questions. It had only complicated them, layering uncertainty over grief until no single answer could cut through cleanly. Daniel Reeves awaited sentencing for a crime the law said he committed, and the town was still trying to understand. Appeals crawled through the system. New tips arrived and were logged, evaluated, shelved. The case never slept. It only changed posture. And somewhere beneath the noise of legal arguments, media spin, and communal guilt, one truth remained untouched. Emily Carter was still missing. No matter how many times the word solved appeared in print, no matter how many years passed, the absence at the center of the case refused to be filled. It lingered in empty classrooms, in quiet roads, in the spaces between what people knew and what they wanted to believe. The cold case had been reopened. A man had been convicted. A town had been shaken. But the mystery, the real one, was still breathing. By the time the sentencing date arrived, the word closure had become taboo in Marrow Creek. No one trusted it anymore. It sounded like a marketing term, something designed to comfort outsiders rather than reflect reality. For the people who lived here, the case had settled into something far more uncomfortable, a permanent state of almost knowing. Daniel Reeves stood before the court thinner than he had been during the trial, his hair grayer, his expression flattened by months of anticipation. He listened as the sentence was read, his face giving nothing away. No outburst, no denial, no confession, just stillness. Life in prison, a decision meant to end the story. Outside, reporters spoke in absolutes. Inside the town, nothing felt absolute at all. The appeals didn't stop. They never do. Defense filings stacked up, dense with technical language, challenging forensic interpretation, eyewitness reliability, procedural gaps. Each motion reopened the case in small, precise ways, like picking at a scar that refused to seal. Prosecutors counter methodically, but even they began to speak less confidently, aware that time had become both their ally and their enemy. Then something happened that didn't fit neatly into any legal framework. A hiker found a shoe. It was discovered along a dried creek bed nearly 60 miles from Marrow Creek, tangled in brush that had grown thick over years of neglect. At first, it was dismissed as debris, but when local authorities logged it, photographed it, and entered it into evidence databases, a match surfaced. Same brand, same size, same model Emily Carter had been wearing the night she vanished. Not proof, not confirmation, but close enough to reopen everything. The shoe was weathered beyond usefulness. No DNA, no fibers, no timeline. It could have been placed there deliberately. It could have been carried by water. It could have belonged to someone else entirely. Still, the location mattered. It suggested movement, distance, a possibility that Emily had been alive long enough to leave the county, maybe even the state. The prosecution downplayed it. The defense amplified it. The town absorbed it like another bruise. Investigators retraced routes again, this time outward instead of inward. Highways, back roads, truck stops, places where people pass through without leaving impressions. They interviewed long-haul drivers, motel clerks, former residents who had left town suddenly in the mid-2000s. Most had nothing to offer. A few had stories too vague to verify. All of it fed the same unbearable uncertainty. Emily Carter's parents watched the coverage silently. They had learned not to attach themselves to objects anymore. Objects had a way of promising too much. Still, when they were shown the shoe privately, something shifted. Not hope, recognition. Her mother said it looked like something Emily would have bought because it was practical, because it would last. The irony didn't escape anyone. As months passed, the case entered a strange new phase. Legally closed, emotionally volatile. Every new detail threatened to undermine the structure built by the verdict. Reeves's attorneys argued that the shoe proved alternate theories the jury never heard. Prosecutors argued it proved nothing at all. Both were right. And then came the letter. It arrived without a return address, postmarked from a city 300 miles away. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, almost too neat. Inside was a single page. No confession, no threats, just a sentence written twice, as if repetition might make it truer. You stopped looking too soon. Authorities treated it as a hoax until forensic analysis revealed something unsettling. The paper stock matched notepads used by a motel chain that had operated near the rest stop mentioned in the earlier tip. A coincidence, maybe, or a reminder that coincidences had driven this case from the beginning. The defense requested immediate review. The prosecution resisted. The judge ordered the letter logged, nothing more. Another fragment without a home. Marrow Creek no longer reacted loudly to developments like this. It reacted internally. People replayed old nights in their minds, measuring distances, imagining alternate timelines. What if Emily hadn't been taken immediately? What if she'd been held somewhere briefly? What if the truth involved more than one person? The case began to feel less like a straight line and more like a knot. Daniel Reeves remained silent. He refused interviews, refused to comment on the shoe, refused to acknowledge the letter. His silence, once read as guilt, now felt ambiguous. Silence could mean many things: fear, resignation, or knowledge that speaking would only deepen the chaos. In prison, Reeves kept to himself. Guards reported nothing unusual. No sudden changes. No breakdowns. Just routine that, somehow, unsettled people more than anger ever could have. The town tried to move forward again, but the ground felt unstable. Memorials were proposed, then abandoned. What exactly were they commemorating? A life? A mystery? A failure? All three refused to be separated. And in the background, the same question kept returning, heavier each time it surfaced. If Daniel Reeves had acted alone, why did the evidence feel so scattered? If he hadn't acted at all, why did the case keep pointing back toward him? And if Emily Carter had survived longer than anyone believed, then where did her story really end? The cold case had been declared solved. The sentence had been handed down. The headlines had moved on. But beneath all of it, the truth remained unsettled, shifting, and dangerously incomplete. A reminder that some mysteries don't resist answers, they multiply them. By now, the case had stopped behaving like a story with an ending. It behaved like a presence, something that lingered in the background of everyday life, invisible until the moment it wasn't. In Marrow Creek, people no longer asked when it would be over. They asked what it was still hiding. The letter changed everything without proving anything. That was the pattern. Every new development widened the frame instead of sharpening it. Investigators traced the motel chain linked to the paper stock, pulling records that barely existed anymore. Ownership had changed. Employees had scattered. Guest logs from the early 2000s were incomplete, handwritten, inconsistent. Names without faces. Faces without memory. One name appeared twice. It meant nothing on its own. A common name. A coincidence, most likely, but in a case built on coincidences that refused to die, it was enough to reopen doors that had already been shut once. The name wasn't Daniel Reeves. That fact alone unsettled everyone. The man attached to it had checked into a roadside motel 2 nights after Emily Carter disappeared, paid cash, stayed one night, left before dawn. No vehicle listed. No ID photocopy, despite policy. The clerk who might have remembered him was dead. The trail ended there, as so many trails in this case had ended, abruptly, without explanation. The prosecution resisted bringing it into the official narrative. They couldn't afford to fracture a conviction that already lived on unstable ground. The defense cataloged it meticulously, stacking it beside the shoe, the dropped call, the rest stop tip, the letter, not as proof, but as erosion. Public confidence began to erode with it. In Marrow Creek, belief shifted again, slowly, reluctantly. People who had once defended the verdict now spoke, more cautiously. People who had rejected it outright felt grimly validated. No one felt victorious. The idea that the truth might be more complex than a single perpetrator settled into the town like a low fog. And then someone remembered something they hadn't remembered before. A former volunteer firefighter came forward, his voice tight with unease. On the night Emily disappeared, he said, he'd been driving home late when he saw a car pulled over on County Road 6. Not Emily's car. Another one. Dark-colored. Engine running. He'd assumed it was someone helping a stranded driver. He hadn't stopped. He hadn't reported it. He hadn't thought about it again until now. Investigators checked everything they could. Old vehicle registrations. Repair records. Nothing placed Reeves there with a second car. Nothing ruled it out either. The detail slid into the file, another loose thread. As the case expanded, a disturbing possibility began to surface. Not officially, not in court filings, but in quiet conversations between people who had lived with the case long enough to stop pretending it made sense. What if Emily Carter's disappearance wasn't a singular act? What if it wasn't impulsive? What if it involved more than one person? The idea felt dangerous. Conspiracies grow easily in the absence of answers. But this wasn't built on imagination alone. It was built on logistics, on how difficult it would be for one person to move someone unseen, unassisted, and leave so little behind, on how the evidence seemed spread across time and distance, resisting a single narrative. Daniel Reeves remained at the center of it all, a fixed point around which uncertainty rotated. From prison, he continued to say nothing. No letters, no statements, no late-night confessions to cellmates. His silence had become a void people filled with whatever they needed it to mean. Some saw guilt, others saw resignation. A few began to wonder if it was something else entirely. The silence of someone who knew that telling the truth would not clarify anything, only fracture it further. Emily's parents withdrew from public view again, not out of defeat, but exhaustion. Every development forced them to reimagine their daughter's final hours. Each theory carried its own cruelty: abduction, escape, survival, betrayal. There was no version that spared them pain. The town attempted something like healing. A memorial was finally built near the school where Emily had taught, careful not to imply an ending that didn't exist. Students who had never known her learned her name anyway. Teachers spoke about kindness, about vigilance, about how quickly ordinary days can rupture. But even that felt provisional. Late one night, a retired detective pulled the original case file from his own storage. He hadn't been asked to. He hadn't been told to. He just couldn't sleep anymore. As he reread early notes, something stood out that had never stood out before. A line written in the margin of a report, dismissed at the time as irrelevant. Vehicle seen twice. No follow-up, no clarification, just that sentence. The detective couldn't remember what it referred to. That terrified him, not because it proved anything, but because it suggested there had been a moment, a fleeting, fragile moment, when the case had pointed in a direction no one had pursued. He contacted investigators quietly. The note was logged, cross-referenced. It matched nothing conclusively. Another ghost. By now, the story had grown too large for the headline that had once tried to contain it. Cold case solved. The phrase echoed with irony. Solved implied completion. This case refused to complete itself. Instead, it revealed something darker and more unsettling than an unsolved mystery. It revealed how easily truth can fracture when time is allowed to intervene. How quickly certainty decays into probability. How justice, once delayed, becomes something else entirely. The question no longer was whether Daniel Reeves had taken Emily Carter. The question was whether the full truth could still exist at all. Because if it had taken 20 years just to arrive at this much uncertainty, then whatever really happened on County Road 6 might be buried not by intention, but by time itself. And time, unlike any suspect, could never be questioned. At this stage, the investigation no longer felt like a search for answers. It felt like an excavation of damage. Every layer removed revealed another beneath it, each one more unstable than the last. What had begun as a disappearance had become a map of everything that could go wrong when time, fear, and hesitation intersect. Authorities quietly expanded the scope. Not officially, not on paper, but in practice. They stopped asking who did it and started asking how many people might have known something and chosen not to act. That shift changed everything. Because guilt, when diluted across a community, becomes harder to confront than a single suspect ever could be. They re-examined phone records again, this time not just Emily Carter's, but anyone whose number appeared near County Road 6 that night. Patterns emerged. Nothing criminal on its own. Calls that stopped abruptly. Phones powered off for hours. Gaps that aligned too neatly to ignore. The problem was scale. Too many possibilities. Too many variables. Time had turned the data into noise. The dropped call resurfaced, heavier now than it had ever been. Audio specialists attempted to recover fragments from archived systems long considered obsolete. Most of it was static. Breath. Movement. Then, faint but undeniable, a sound that froze the room. A vehicle door closing. Not Emily's phone. Someone else's proximity. Someone close enough to end a call without speaking. The defense demanded inclusion. The prosecution hesitated. The judge allowed it under strict limitation. The sound was real. The meaning remained contested. Another truth that refused to sit still. Public faith fractured further. Marrow Creek became a town that lived inside footnotes. Every ordinary moment carried the weight of speculation. That truck, that stranger, that night you drove a different route home. People interrogated themselves silently, wondering whether they had been closer to the truth than they ever realized. Then the timeline shifted again. A financial analyst reviewing Reeves's records for the appeal noticed something that hadn't mattered before. A cash withdrawal made the morning after Emily vanished. Not unusual in isolation, but paired with the location, a bank near the highway leading out of town, it became suggestive. He had never mentioned leaving town that day. No receipts, no witnesses, just a withdrawal and a gap. Investigators followed it carefully. Cameras from that era were unreliable, grainy, often overwritten. One frame survived. Reeves at the ATM, alone, looking over his shoulder. Not panicked, alert, as if he were aware of being observed, even when no one was watching. It proved nothing. It unsettled everyone. The defense countered with their own discovery, records showing that another man, someone with no official connection to the case, had withdrawn a similar amount of cash from the same bank within an hour. Coincidence again, or convergence? The case seemed to thrive on the space between those two interpretations. Emily Carter's name resurfaced in places no one expected. A missing persons forum archived from the early 2000s. A post claiming she'd been seen in a border town years later. Unverified. Unprovable. The kind of story that circulates because people need to believe survival is possible, even when probability says otherwise. Authorities checked anyway. They always did. Nothing held. The shoe. The letter. The motel paper. The second vehicle. The dropped call. The partial DNA. Each element demanded attention. Together, they refused coherence. The more investigators tried to force them into a single narrative, the more the story resisted. A veteran profiler was brought in quietly, someone who specialized not in suspects, but in systems. His conclusion wasn't comforting. He suggested that the case didn't fail because of one mistake. It failed because of alignment. The wrong assumptions at the wrong moments, reinforced by a town's desire to believe itself safe. He suggested that whoever was responsible, whether Reeves or someone else or more than one person, had benefited less from intelligence and more from timing. That idea spread quickly. Evil as opportunistic rather than calculated. That frightened people more than any mastermind ever could. Reeves's appeals stalled, then advanced, then stalled again. Years passed in legal increments. The sentence stood. The doubt did not dissolve. Every anniversary of Emily's disappearance reignited debate. Some demanded finality. Others demanded honesty. The two rarely coexist. Emily's parents aged further. Their lives measured now not by milestones but by endurance. They stopped giving interviews. They stopped attending hearings. Not because they believed the truth had been found, but because the process had taken everything it could from them. Grief had become private again. And still, something remained unresolved beneath all the noise. Late one evening, an investigator reviewing old aerial photographs noticed a subtle anomaly near the creek where the shoe had been found. Not a grave, not a disturbance, just an absence. a patch of land that had been cleared briefly, then allowed to reclaim itself. It had happened sometime between 2003 and 2005. Narrow window. No records explaining why. Ground searches returned nothing. But the question lingered. Why clear land that didn't need clearing? By now, the case no longer belonged to law enforcement alone. It belonged to time. And time was not interested in clarity. It eroded edges. It softened certainty. It turned facts into approximations. The phrase cold case had once implied stasis. Something frozen. This case was anything but. It moved constantly, shifting shape, changing meaning, refusing to settle. And as the years continued to pass, one realization settled in with quiet, irreversible weight. Even if the full truth were uncovered tomorrow, even if every action were mapped, every name revealed, it would arrive too late to undo what had already been lost. The mystery of Emily Carter was no longer just about what happened to her. It was about what happens when time is allowed to outrun truth, and whether justice, delayed long enough, stops being justice at all. By now, the case no longer advanced in breakthroughs. It advanced in realizations, quiet ones, the kind that arrive without announcement and stay, because they cannot be disproven. The realization that truth doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it dissolves, spread thin across too many years, too many choices, too many people who didn't think their silence mattered. Investigators reached the end of what procedure could offer. Every database had been queried, every lead revisited, every theory tested until it bent or broke. What remained was not evidence, but implication, a shadow cast by actions that had never been recorded properly enough to confront directly. The profiler's assessment gained traction in private circles. Not a single villain, not a clean narrative, a convergence, a brief window where opportunity, familiarity, and hesitation overlapped just long enough for a life to vanish. The idea that no one moment had failed catastrophically. Instead, many had failed quietly. That was harder to prosecute, harder to mourn. Daniel Reeves's appeals reached their final stage. Courts affirmed the conviction, not because doubt had vanished, but because doubt had failed to meet the threshold required to undo a verdict. The law had done what it was designed to do. It drew a line and stood by it, even as uncertainty pressed against the edges. Reeves received the ruling without reaction. Witnesses said he nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging something inevitable. Whether that inevitability was justice or resignation remained impossible to tell. He was transferred to a long-term facility far from Arrow Creek. Distance, once again, did what it always did. It softened attention without resolving anything. The town followed suit. Slowly, uneasily. News vans stopped coming. National interest drifted elsewhere. The headline that had once promised finality faded into search archives, preserved but rarely revisited. Cold case solved. The words aged poorly. Emily Carter's name began to appear less often in print, but more often in memory. A scholarship established quietly in her honor. A tree planted near the school. Gestures that didn't demand answers, only remembrance. For the first time in years, the town allowed itself to grieve without arguing. Then, unexpectedly, something shifted again. A former inmate from Reeves's facility requested a meeting with investigators. Not immediately, not urgently, months after Reeves's transfer, when the case had already begun to recede from public consciousness. The man claimed Reeves had spoken once, casually, without emphasis. Not a confession, not a denial, just a sentence dropped into conversation and never referenced again. Things don't disappear unless more than one person wants them gone. The statement was infuriating in its ambiguity. It could mean anything, or nothing. The inmate admitted as much. He didn't know what Reeves meant. He didn't ask. He assumed it was metaphorical. Investigators logged it anyway. The file grew heavier, even as the chance of resolution shrank further. Emily's parents were informed, carefully, gently. They listened. They thanked the officer. They asked no follow-up questions. At some point, questions stop being tools and start becoming weapons. They had learned where that line was. Marrow Creek entered a new phase of quiet. Not denial, not acceptance. Something in between. A recognition that some truths, even if they exist, are not retrievable in their original form. They degrade. They scatter. They survive only as fragments. People still drove County Road 6. They always would, but they did it differently now. Slower. More aware. The road no longer felt neutral. It felt marked, even without signs. Occasionally, someone new would move into town and ask about the story. Someone would explain it, briefly, cautiously, as if handling something fragile. A woman disappeared. Years later, an arrest. Still no body. Still no certainty. The listener would nod, unsettled, then move on. The locals stayed. In private moments, some residents admitted a thought they rarely voiced aloud, that maybe the case had reached the only ending it was capable of reaching. Not truth, not closure, but containment, a boundary drawn around uncertainty, so life could continue without collapsing under its weight. That idea was uncomfortable, but it carried a strange relief. Emily Carter had not been forgotten. She had become something else, a reminder of how quickly safety can be assumed, how easily urgency can fade, how dangerous it is to believe that answers will wait patiently for us to be ready. The system had spoken. The town had responded. Time had done the rest. And somewhere beneath the legal outcomes, beneath the memorials and the headlines and the files marked closed, the same question remained. Stripped now of urgency, but not of power. Was the truth ever fully known? Or had it slipped away in the spaces between moments when someone might have acted but didn't? The cold case had been declared solved, but the mystery had never agreed. Time did what it always does best. It blurred edges. It dulled outrage. It made even the most unsettling questions feel distant, like sounds heard through walls too thick to break. The case stopped being something people argued about and became something they carried, quietly, individually, without witnesses. Daniel Reeves settled into the rhythm of incarceration, a routine stripped of urgency, measured in counts and meal trays, an institutional light that never fully dimmed. Guards noted nothing unusual. No breakdowns. No proclamations. He spoke rarely, and when he did, it was about ordinary things. Weather. Books. A request for different shoes. If he was haunted, it did not show in ways the system could record. Investigators checked in less frequently. There were no new leads to chase, only old ones to revisit, and they had been revisited enough times to know their shape by heart. The case file remained technically active, but functionally inert. A body without a pulse. Still, some couldn't let go. A retired deputy, long removed from authority, continued to review his old notes in the evenings, not because he expected revelation, but because routine had become habit, and habit had become a form of loyalty. He noticed patterns others had dismissed, not patterns that pointed to guilt, but patterns of behavior, delays, hesitations, the way certain names appeared frequently but never prominently. One name, in particular, surfaced again and again, not as a suspect, not even as a witness of consequence, just someone who had been nearby too often for coincidence to feel comfortable. Someone who had always answered questions cooperatively, politely, without contradiction. Someone whose statements never quite overlapped with anyone else's. The deputy shared his thoughts with no one. He knew better. Patterns without proof are dangerous things. They whisper accusations without accountability. So he kept them to himself, letting them age like unanswered letters. In Marrow Creek, life moved forward unevenly. Businesses reopened. Children grew up knowing Emily Carter as a name, not a person. The road where she disappeared became just another stretch of asphalt, though some locals still felt the urge to glance toward the shoulder as they passed, as if expecting the past to reassert itself. The Carter house remained unchanged. Not frozen, but preserved. Emily's room stayed intact, not as a shrine, but as a pause. A moment held open in case the world ever offered an explanation worth returning for. Her parents aged visibly. Grief, when unresolved, leaves marks that time does not erase, only rearranges. They were asked, occasionally, how they felt about the case being labeled solved. They answered carefully. They said they trusted the system. They said they were grateful for the effort. They said they were learning to live with what they had. None of those statements contradicted the others. None of them confirmed belief. The town anniversary came and went. No ceremonies, no speeches, just a quiet acknowledgement in the local paper. A paragraph, a photograph. The past reduced to column inches once again. Then, unexpectedly, the past spoke. A box arrived at the sheriff's office, without a return address. Inside, a collection of items that had no reason to exist together. A receipt dated weeks after Emily's disappearance. A set of keys wrapped in cloth. A photograph, faded and creased, showing a stretch of land just beyond county limits. No note, no explanation. The evidence technician logged the items methodically, but unease spread quickly. The receipt matched a gas station miles away from where Reeves claimed to have been that night. The keys did not match any known vehicle. The photograph showed no landmarks easily identifiable, but the angle suggested familiarity, intimacy with the terrain. Someone, somewhere, had chosen to disturb the stillness. Investigators reopened dormant channels. Quietly, without announcements. For the first time in years, calls were made not because procedure demanded it, but because instinct insisted. The kind of instinct that only surfaces when coincidence becomes too deliberate to ignore. The box yielded no fingerprints, no DNA. Whoever sent it understood what absence could accomplish. The items spoke without implicating. They pointed without accusing. Marrow Creek felt the shift before it was told. Rumors moved faster than confirmation. People watched each other again. Listened more closely. Old conversations replayed in new light. The past, long contained, began to leak. Emily Carter's case, declared finished, exhaled and refused to stay buried. And with that refusal came a realization as unsettling as it was undeniable. If the truth was still capable of surfacing after all this time, then perhaps it had never been gone at all. Perhaps it had been waiting. Waiting for someone to break. Waiting for someone to remember. Waiting for someone to decide that silence was finally more dangerous than speaking. The phone rang in the early hours, not loud enough to startle, just persistent enough to refuse being ignored. The kind of call that carries weight before a single word is spoken. By the time the receiver was lifted, the silence on the other end already said more than an explanation ever could. A name was mentioned, not shouted, not emphasized, just stated, flat and final, as if it had always belonged to the case and was only now being returned to its proper place. A name that had never appeared in headlines. A name that had never been circled in red. A name that had lived comfortably in the margins. The person behind it did not run. They came in willingly, unremarkably, without spectacle. No resistance. No lawyer immediately requested. They sat down, folded their hands and listened. When asked why now, they paused long enough for the question to echo back on itself. Because the silence stopped working. The room did not fill with confession. It filled with fragments, half-answers, corrections, memories revised just enough to make room for survival. The story that emerged was not one of rage or malice, but of panic layered over opportunity, assisted by hesitation, protected by time. Emily Carter had not vanished into nothing. She had been seen, briefly, close enough to help, close enough to be recognized, close enough to create a problem that needed to be managed, not solved. What followed was not planned. That was the most unsettling part. No grand design, no rehearsed alibi, just a sequence of decisions made too quickly to feel intentional. and too slowly to be accidental. A vehicle stopped where it shouldn't have. A conversation that turned sharp. A moment when someone realized that stepping forward would mean never stepping back. The body was moved. Not far, just far enough. The land in the photograph from the box came into focus. Deputies walked it in silence, guided not by hope but by inevitability. The ground had changed over the years. Trees grown, soil shifted, but the shape of concealment remained. The way disturbed earth never quite forgets itself. They found remnants, not enough to restore, enough to confirm. The arrest came hours later. Quiet, deliberate, no press release until paperwork was complete. When it finally broke, it did not explode. It rippled through the town, through the state, through the country. The headlines spread faster than comprehension could keep up. Texas 2003 cold case solved. Surprise arrest rocks small town. Daniel Reeves was exonerated within days. Released with no cameras waiting. No apology large enough to balance the weight of years lost to a verdict built on absence. He did not speak publicly. He did not need to. The system's reversal said everything he could not. The person now in custody did not deny involvement. They only resisted the word murder. They preferred accident, panic, fear, as if language could still control outcome. Emily Carter's parents were told in person. They listened. They held each other. They asked one question and only one. Where? When they were taken there, they did not cry out. They stood very still. Grief, when finally given shape, does not arrive loudly. It settles. Heavy. Complete. Marrow Creek did not celebrate. There was no release in knowing. Only reckoning. Conversations shifted from speculation to memory. From rumor to responsibility. People realized how close they had been to the truth without touching it. How many times they had looked directly at the answer and chosen not to see. The town changed after that. Subtly, permanently, trust became something earned again, slowly, cautiously. The road on County 6 was no longer just a place where something happened. It was a reminder of what happens when silence is mistaken for safety. Emily Carter was laid to rest properly. Her name spoken without a question mark attached. The scholarship expanded. The tree grew. And the cold case, finally, truthfully, was solved. But the shock did not come from the arrest. It came from the realization that the mystery had survived not because it was clever, not because it was hidden well, but because too many people believed that doing nothing was not the same as choosing wrong. In the end, the case did not teach Marrow Creek how to catch a killer. It taught them how easy it is to live beside the truth. And let it wait. The cameras eventually left, but the town did not return to the shape it once knew. Resolution had not restored balance. It had rearranged it. Truth, when it finally surfaces, does not heal by default. It exposes what time had allowed to calcify. The person responsible waited alone, no longer protected by familiarity, no longer buffered by years of being overlooked. Their name, once unremarkable, became impossible to detach from the case. It appeared in documents, in search results, in whispered conversations that stopped when footsteps approached. The town learned how quickly anonymity can evaporate. In custody, the details continue to emerge, not dramatically, not in full confessions, but in corrections. Small adjustments to earlier statements, clarifications that arrived only after the weight of proof made resistance pointless. Each revision tightened the narrative, not into something clean, but into something undeniably real. There had been others who knew pieces, not the whole truth, just enough to sense its shape. They had convinced themselves that uncertainty was innocence, that suspicion without confirmation was not obligation. None of them were charged. None of them were innocent in the way they once believed. Investigators documented everything with renewed precision. Not because the case required it. The case was already closed, but because history would. This time, there would be no gaps large enough to hide inside. Daniel Reeves did not return to Marrow Creek. He declined interviews, declined compensation ceremonies. He took a small settlement and disappeared into a quieter life, carrying years that could not be reimbursed. Some losses cannot be corrected. They can only be acknowledged and then lived beside. Emily Carter's parents adjusted to a new reality they had never imagined surviving long enough to face. Grief did not end. It changed posture. It no longer leaned forward searching. It sat back, exhausted, holding answers that arrived too late to feel like relief. The site where Emily was found became known, then quietly forgotten again, by design. No marker, no fence, just land reclaimed by weather and time. The absence of spectacle felt appropriate. Some places should not be made permanent. Marrow Creek learned restraint. When journalists called years later asking for reflections, most residents declined. They had said enough when it mattered least. Now, they understood the cost of words spoken too late. The case entered textbooks, training seminars, criminal justice lectures that emphasized one lesson above all others. Cold cases are not always cold because evidence is missing. Sometimes they're cold because action was deferred until memory became unreliable and courage became optional. Students asked how long it took to solve the case. The answer varied depending on who was asked. Some said 20 years. Others said a lifetime. A few said it still wasn't finished. Because closure is not a legal status. It is a condition that some people never reach. County Road 6 remained open. Traffic flowed. New drivers unaware of its history passed without slowing. But for those who remembered, the road never felt ordinary again. It carried the knowledge that moments matter, that hesitation has consequences, that silence, when shared, can become infrastructure. The final report ended with facts, not philosophy, dates, names, evidence chains. But the community told a different ending, one that never made it onto paper. They said the case was solved the night someone finally decided that telling the truth was less dangerous than continuing to live with it. And even then, it took years for the echo to fade. The cold case had an ending, but the lesson did not. And somewhere long after the files were archived and the headlines stopped circulating, the question lingered. Not about guilt, not about justice, but about timing. How many answers exist in the world right now? Waiting only for someone to speak while it still matters. The room goes quiet. The recording light stays on. And the story, finally, lets the silence do the rest. Long after the verdicts were finalized and the last official statement archived, the case continued its quiet work. Not in courtrooms, not in newsrooms, but in kitchens, classrooms, and long pauses between sentences where people realized something about themselves they had never intended to learn. In Marrow Creek, the phrase before the arrest became shorthand. Before trust shifted, before assumptions cracked, before people started replaying old memories with new emphasis. The town did not fracture, but it recalibrated. Familiar faces were still familiar, just no longer unquestioned. Some residents revisited moments they had dismissed for years. A conversation cut short, a ride offered and declined, a night when something felt off, but not alarming enough to interrupt routine. These memories did not accuse anyone directly. They accused comfort. The person convicted entered a different kind of silence, not the anonymity of the past, but the isolation of being known. Every attempt to frame the events as misunderstanding failed under scrutiny. Panic could explain the moment. It could not explain the years that followed, the decisions to remain quiet, the willingness to let another person absorb the consequences. Legal experts debated responsibility beyond the charge. Moral philosophers were invited onto panels. Could collective hesitation be considered complicity? The question never reached consensus, but it left marks. It forced people to consider how many crimes survive not through secrecy, but through shared avoidance. Emily Carter's story became a reference point, not sensationalized, but cited, in discussions about missing persons, about investigative bias, about how quickly communities can normalize uncertainty if doing so preserves daily life. Her name carried weight now, not because it was tragic, but because it was instructive. The scholarship recipients learned her story early, not as a warning, but as context. They spoke her name without fear, without spectacle. In that repetition, something steadier replaced shock. Daniel Reeves surfaced once more, briefly, in a letter published by an advocacy group. It was not angry. It was not eloquent. It was precise. He wrote about time measured in lost choices, about how silence from others had been louder than any accusation. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not offer it either. Marrow Creek responded without comment. Some read the letter. Some refused to. The town had learned that engagement is also a decision, and not all decisions need to be public. The road remained unchanged, but new signs appeared nearby. Not memorials, not warnings, just reflective markers meant to slow traffic. Safety improvements justified by unrelated studies. Practical, unemotional. Still, everyone knew why they were there. Visitors still asked what it felt like, living in a town with a case like that. The answer depended on who spoke. Some said it was like carrying a scar that only hurt when touched. Others said it was like learning that the floor beneath you had always been thinner than you believed. What united them was this. No one said it felt finished, because endings, when delayed too long, do not arrive cleanly. They seep. They stain adjacent stories. They reframe past decisions that can no longer be altered. The cold case had taught them something no investigation ever puts in a report. That truth is not just something you uncover. It is something you choose not to ignore. And that choice has a shelf life. Years later, when the town was mentioned in passing on a true crime podcast, residents barely reacted. They had moved past the need to correct or clarify. The story no longer belonged to curiosity. It belonged to consequence. The recording faded out. But the lesson stayed sharp, because somewhere else, in some other town, a similar silence was forming. And Marrow Creek knew now how dangerous that could be. The light clicks off, but the echo doesn't. With distance came reinterpretation. Articles written years later no longer framed the case as a mystery, but as a study. Analysts dissected timelines with academic detachment. Charts replaced faces. Probability replaced emotion. What had once been lived became something teachable. Marrow Creek watched itself turn into material. Residents recognized their town in footnotes, not descriptions. Population size, median income, proximity to highways, as if the conditions alone had shaped the outcome, as if people were interchangeable variables rather than decision-makers who had hesitated at crucial moments. The simplification was unsettling. It removed responsibility too easily. Those who had been children in 2003 were adults now. Some had left. Some stayed. For them, the case was not an interruption of normal life. It was the background hum they grew up with, a sense that certainty was fragile, that answers could exist nearby without ever announcing themselves. They carried that awareness into adulthood differently. Some became meticulous, others suspicious. A few chose careers shaped by what they had absorbed quietly, law enforcement, social work, journalism. Not out of revenge, out of recognition. The person convicted aged in custody, their relevance shrinking as attention moved on. They became less a figure of outrage and more a reminder of how ordinary circumstances can produce irreversible outcomes. Their name lost its shock value, but not its meaning. Emily Carter's presence shifted again, from lesson to legacy. Her story was no longer framed around disappearance, but around aftermath. What followed when the truth surfaced too late to prevent damage, but just in time to prevent erasure? Her parents withdrew further from public view, not out of bitterness, out of preservation. They had learned that being visible invites interpretation, and interpretation rarely aligns with reality. Their grief no longer needed witnesses. Marrow Creek learned to live without explaining itself. When outsiders asked, answers became shorter, more neutral. The town had paid enough in clarity. It was allowed its ambiguity now. The sheriff's office kept the case file accessible, not archived away entirely. Not because it was needed, but because it symbolized vigilance. A reminder to future officers that conclusions should be challenged, even when convenient. Especially when convenient. Occasionally, someone would reread the original headline and feel its dissonance. Cold case solved. The words implied completion, a neat edge, a before and after. But lived experience resisted that framing. The case had not ended. It had transformed into caution, into memory, into an unspoken agreement to listen longer next time. The road, the town, the people, all continued forward, not cleansed, not absolved, just aware. And awareness, once earned, does not fade easily, because the most unsettling truth the case revealed was not about violence or guilt. It was about timing, about how close the answers had always been, about how long they were allowed to remain and used. The story stopped being about what happened in 2003. It became about everything that happened afterward. Years passed without ceremony. Not enough distance to forget, just enough to live. The case receded into routine references, a shorthand used sparingly, like a word people knew could change the temperature of a room if spoken carelessly. Marrow Creek learned how to hold two truths at once, that justice, in its procedural form, had been served, and that something irretrievable had still been lost. The town did not argue these points anymore. It allowed them to coexist, uneasy but stable. New leadership came and went. Policies shifted. Training modules updated. The lesson embedded itself quietly into practice. Follow up longer. Ask again. Document the small inconsistencies before they harden into background noise. The case became a caution, not against evil, but against assumption. At community meetings, when discussions drifted toward safety or accountability, no one needed to reference names. The understanding was shared that silence can look like calm until it isn't, that familiarity can disguise risk, that urgency does not announce itself with sirens. Emily Carter's legacy moved forward without spectacle. The scholarship recipients did not feel burdened by it. They felt steadied, a reminder that attention, when sustained, can become protection, that remembering is not passive. It requires effort. Daniel Reeves remained absent by choice. The town respected that. Absence, in this context, was not avoidance. It was boundary. Some stories, once concluded, are not meant to be revisited by those who survived them. The person responsible faded into the institutional rhythm of incarceration. Appeals quieted. Public interest evaporated. Accountability persisted without commentary. That, too, was a form of ending. Occasionally, someone would revisit the case online and notice how the narrative had flattened over time, how complexity had been compressed into digestible summaries, how uncertainty had been edited out in favor of clarity. It was comforting. It was inaccurate. The people who lived it knew better. They knew that answers had not arrived all at once. They had accumulated, slowly, through discomfort, through delayed courage, through the moment when one person decided that continuing to live with the truth was finally heavier than releasing it. That decision did not feel heroic. It felt overdue. The road remained. The town remained. Life continued with a slightly altered posture, as if everyone leaned forward just a fraction more than before, listening for what might otherwise be missed. The cold case had ended in records and reports, but in Marrow Creek, it existed as a permanent adjustment, a recalibration of attention, a reminder that moments do not ask permission before they matter, and that the difference between mystery and memory is often nothing more than timing. The recording could stop here. The light could turn off, but the awareness it left behind would keep moving, quietly, into places that had not yet learned how costly silence can be. And that, more than any verdict, was what remained.